Hello and welcome to episode 20 of our unofficial SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is December 4th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Today we have Philipp back, and he will talk about a new quality check tool for SAP on Azure, which he just published on GitHub. But as always, before we go there, let's quickly take a look at some of the topics that happened this week or that will happen next week. Because obviously next week is SAP TechEd. As mentioned before, it's free, it's virtual. There are quite a few sessions available. So I think it's definitely worth to check out. I'm looking forward to the keynotes. Jürgen Müller is obviously doing some keynotes. There's some other cool content there. And obviously, there's also some content related to Azure. And I quickly want to highlight a few sessions that you can easily find if you just search for Azure. There's one session from Hiren, a colleague of ours, who'll talk about new offerings to accelerate migrations of SAP landscapes to Azure. I also have another similar session together with SAP, where we talk about DMO, so the database migration option, how we can move an SAP system to S/4HANA on Azure. There's one session from the Commerce Cloud team. As you might know, they're running hundreds of customers on Azure. So the SAP Commerce Cloud solution is running on Azure, and they talk about how they're doing this and what things they learned from how to do this and stuff like that. And then finally, there's also a session about from NetApp talking about Azure NetApp files. So obviously, listeners know a lot in the meantime about Azure NetApp files, thanks to all the work that Ralf did in the previous sessions. But if you want to hear from NetApp directly, then I think this session at TechEd is certainly also interesting. Another thing, and this is just a personal recommendation or insight that I'm looking for, you might have heard about this SAP Work Zone, and actually there are really quite a few sessions around this topic. So I think during the last SuccessFactors event, I'm not sure what exactly the name was, SAP announced SAP Work Zone for the first time, showed how it relates or works together with SuccessFactors. And now at TechEd, it really looks like they're going big in this, and they're talking about Work Zone. The customer Döhler already apparently has been using Work Zone. So for me, I think this will be quite interesting to see how this new product from SAP is positioned, how it integrates with other SAP technologies, how it integrates with other technologies from Microsoft and so on. So I'm definitely looking forward to some of these sessions there. Then we already talked about this last week, or we announced this last week. We had a big event yesterday where we talked about Azure Synapse, that Azure Synapse is now GA. So all around analytics, basically. In this context, we also announced a new product called Azure Purview. And here in the details, you can read a lot how FedEx is using this. There are some nice numbers. 16 million packages are delivered daily from FedEx, and obviously they are scanned in multiple stages. So when a package is received or picked up and stuff like that, and all of this information is stored in an Azure data lake. And now, FedEx talks a little how they are using Azure Synapse and these tools, how to analyze this data and get some information out of this huge amount of data. There's some here about traffic and weather information. They're combining this there, so it's quite an interesting story. Still, honestly, I have to admit, when I read through this, it was interesting to understand this scenario, but then I also found a video on Microsoft Mechanics that actually shows how Purview, for example, is really working, and how you create these different data flows, how you connect, for example, to an SAP system here, and are then able to visualize and work with the data. So obviously, I'm not a data expert. Maybe we need to re-invite Roman to our podcast so he can explain more about these topics in detail. But I still think this, at least for me, was a very interesting announcement. Actually, during the event yesterday, we also had Julia White and Amy Hood talking really about how we are using all these data and analytics tools at Microsoft. So as mentioned before, I mean, Microsoft is a huge customer of SAP, so we have a lot of data in the SAP systems. And then Amy Hood was talking really about how their completely business or model changed using analytics functionalities and accessing data, using a lot of automation tools and stuff like that to visualize the data in the different previous data silos. So I think that was quite interesting. And along these lines, there's also a nice blog from Julius von Kethold. I think that he's one of our partners or so, and he talks about integrating SAP ERP data into the common data model. So the common data model, that's basically the foundation on our side for Dynamics, for the Power Platform, for Power BI, obviously. And in this blog, he talks about how to connect to an SAP system and then convert the data, or export and convert the data into the CDM, into the common data model. And then from there, how you can actually leverage Power BI, Databricks, and other tools to visualize the data. So he explains how to use data intelligence to connect to the backend system, how to add the different connections, how to then create here this specific flow, how to extract the data. I cannot make it bigger, but so how this whole conversion is happening, and then in the end the data is in CDM, and then you can actually build on top of that. You can create a Power BI or whatever. So I think that was also a pretty interesting blog that provided some insights in how to work with the common data model on the Microsoft side.
Yeah, there's a link for Open Data Initiative. Do you have any new information? What is the status with Open Data Initiative?
Unfortunately not. So I know that on the yes, it was announced, I think almost 2 years ago or something like that, or 1 year, 2 years. And obviously we have been working there. There's also some specifications there. Recently, to be honest, I know that between Adobe and Microsoft, we had some customers also talking about the Open Data Initiative and stuff like that. But I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure how the overall status is of the Open Data Initiative. Okay. Maybe that's also something that we could follow up in one of our next podcasts.
Yep.
Good idea.
Good. So one last thing that I found was very interesting is a blog by Dennis Padilla, and quite often, obviously, in SAP landscapes, we have SAP Fiori applications. So you have a front-end server or whatever. So the typical architectures that also contain an SAP Fiori system. But especially when you're running this, obviously, in Azure, then there's often the question, well, how can we use Azure native functionalities to support set up a connection to the Fiori applications? And here, what Dennis writes about is how you can use the web application firewall, so the application gateway web application firewall, in the context of an SAP Fiori application. So typically, you would use the SAP Web Dispatcher. I think that's the standard tool that you normally use when setting up an SAP Fiori environment and when you need this for load balancing and whatever. But in this blog, he outlines, well, how you can use the web application firewall to do this. And obviously, the huge benefit of an application gateway is that this is a managed service. So this is not a component like the web dispatcher that you need to maintain, that you need to operate, that you need to update and whatever. But in the past, it is actually, you need to take care of a few things to really make sure that everything is working, that the session handling is okay, that certificate handling is okay, and stuff like that. And in this blog, he outlines quite detailed the steps, what you need to do to set up the web application firewall, what settings you need to provide and stuff like that, and then how you can actually also connect it to your Fiori systems, and also make sure that you have all the keep alive parameters in place and stuff like that. So I think that's also a quite interesting blog post.
That's a must-have. Keep alive was a missing. Keep alive was a cause for many troubles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
It's only my suggestion for this blog should be that he should always use in front of those names SAP or Azure or Microsoft, because our naming is sometimes very similar, and people who doesn't understand what we are talking about, they will somehow, okay, is this SAP part or is this Microsoft part? Yeah? So we need to be a little bit careful how we name it, but it's okay. The article is very nice. Yeah?
No, but you're absolutely right, especially only if you look at the term gateway.
Exactly.
I mean, this could be the SAP gateway, which is used to expose OData services. Yeah. This could also be the gateway process in the SAP kernel, basically.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it can be the application gateway, the Azure piece. So I agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Quite complicated or quite confusing. Good. With this, Goran, you also had another thing that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah. So was it's about, maybe it's not so known, ability to change, let's say, the performance tier of the Azure Premium Disk. So that's kind of already interesting thing. Premium disks are very beloved in Azure, also used for the database, simply because of the ability to have a kind of good performance and price ratio is really quite okay. I mean, they're not performing so well like Azure NetApp File or the other disks, but they really have very good performance and price ratio. The challenge here is sometimes you have a less features, and feature would be typically if you work with a premium disk, to get more space, you need to stripe the disks, or you need to extend the additional stripes. If you need maybe more IOPS and throughput, you need and even if you do not need space, you need to expand those stripes on Windows and Linux, and that makes a bit kind of administrational part a bit more challenging. So kind of a new stuff which was actually announced in July. And now it's in GA, it's ability that you can really change those performance tiers. So if I would just go quickly in portal. So I have here a bunch of premium disks. Actually, they are shared disk, Azure shared disk for the Windows cluster, and this would work as well. If I would go to the size and performance, and let's say pick one disk, 256, that's a P15. So default speed or default SLAs are 1100 IOPS and 125 megabytes per second. But basically, what I can change it here to go to the upper tier, and here it's kind of mentioned, okay, from the source disk where you can upgrade. So when you upgrade, you will get better performance, and you will pay actually for the higher rate. But then basically after one day, you can also go back. So the question, the also currently limitation is that you can't do it, unfortunately, on the fly, meaning you need to either stop the VM or you need to deattach the disk, change those performance, deattach the disk, meaning it is a kind of downtime, and meaning it's not really kind of convenient. But let's say we have currently one customer who is interested in a feature, and the use case is that he is doing the migration. During the migration, the disk size will stay fixed, but he realized during the testing he would need much more IOPS and throughput because and that IO patterns during the migration, it's totally different than during the normal runtime. And typically, if you would load the database, you would really hit those disks hard. Now, if he wouldn't have those features, he would need basically to provide a bigger stripe to met the IOPS and throughput performance, and after the migration, he would need to go down, to reduce the stripe size or to create a new one, move the data and log this, for example, and it's an overhead. So basically, idea is he would, let's say, he would have a small size that he needs. He would have increased the performance tier during the migration, and after the migration is done, he could, for example, just stop the VM, change those tier to whatever, let's say, original size, and start the VM. And it's a very, it is a downtime, but for them, it's in this context is kind of acceptable. And of course, there is this will be improved in the future to do it online, but I still do see some kind of benefits at the moment, right, for the customer. So maybe just as a tip, it is a kind of interesting feature. Yeah, it is interesting because ideally it's basically, in ideal world, which you can do, by the way, with the Ultra, if you have some kind of peaks, you add more either performance or more size, and especially for the performance, sometimes you want to go down, because typically those peaks are not frequent. They're really rare. Yeah.
I guess just for these migration scenarios, this really can make a lot of sense. That during the migration, you need a little more performance, you need a little more IOPS, and then typically after the migration, you can actually have another downtime, because for the migration you already have a downtime window. Correct. So resizing the disk back, even if it's right now only in a downtime possible. Well, before you hand over the system back to your business, you could just do another short downtime and then have it. So I think
downtime is already there planned. Right?
Exactly.
Where's the heck? Yeah. So basically that would even limit the downtime because they have less management work here, so to say. To reconfigure all those kind of stuff and maybe move the data here and there, it's much more less work and less complexity, and basically reduce also from time perspective the downtime. Yeah. So interesting
good start.
And I think it's very important to point out that also customer can combine the already existing boosting for those below P30, and I think we will have also boosting for bigger disk later. This is also one part of combination, and what is very important, what you already mentioned, is that it's just really from configuration perspective, small script. What is the most important part that customer must accept this downtime.
Correct. Yeah. Boosting, it's nice because it's on the fly, but it's short.
It's short. It's predefined time.
It's predefined. So if it fits your need, okay. If not, okay, it helps for short time, but not for longer time. So ideally, it's to have it kind of, you as a customer can decide it, so to say, how much you would need more, and basically then pay for what you use more, and then if you don't need it, you pay less, right? If you go down with the SLAs,
Yep. There is one mechanism I think that needs to be mentioned here, why it is probably a little bit harder to have all these steps online. When customers run managed disks, we have still the storage accounts in the backend that have certain performance criteria.
Blast from the past.
When you correct. So when you shut down the VM and change this performance tier, then we can take action to distribute the load between different systems. If you have a disk that can handle 50 megabytes per second, for example, and suddenly it should do 400, we have to take care that the networking is there, that the performance on the backend is there.
Yeah.
So this is not like, let's move it. It involves a lot of components. And that's why we maybe, for example, change the storage account name in the backend, because then we create a new storage account in the backend that can serve more performance.
And I think people are mostly mapping that to on-premise, where you can like NetApp change that, but they always forget that in the cloud, the big difference is that we are putting SLA on top of that, guarantee on top of that, guarantee for throughput, guarantee for IOPS. Yeah, on-premise in general, you are just extending that, but there are no guarantee that you'll really put on the end, but we are guaranteed that. And this is a bring complexity on our side, additional to all those other complexities.
But that's a good point from Philip, because generally for the disk throughput, you need to think on that VM limit as well, because each VM limit size has a different limit. So not to be forgotten. Good point.
And if you take a D4, it will not be faster, even if you make a temporary P50 out of it.
Right. You get more on the disk, but you are throttled by
limited.
The VM.
That's actually maybe a good segue, because obviously you need to check these things. So if I increase the disk size, I need to check whether the virtual machine is the right size to actually build these IOPS and throughput performance. Now, Philip, I don't know if your check tool already does this, but in general, I think it does. Perfect. So this is really the perfect handover. So Philip, again, maybe you can start with a quick introduction about yourself, and then then I'm really looking forward to the quality check tool.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. It's always fun to be back on Fridays. My name is Philip. I'm part of the same team as Goran. I'm working in Azure Global Customer Engineering and commercial industry space. And today I'm happy that we basically announced one of our new checks, and you can't imagine how many ideas we have already for it for the next month. We started with HANA because we've seen in a lot of cases that customers struggle with all the documentation that is out there, and then they need to follow certain checks or recommendations to have a certified HANA infrastructure. Now, what we thought of is, when we built this quality check, is give the customer an easy way of checking the VM has all the requirements in place before they, for example, install HANA, and then avoid copying data, moving data, and so on. Or in case if there is an issue, they can also just run them through and say, hey, is everything still okay? And we offered it for free on our GitHub repo. So just check it out and I'll show it to you in a second. So how does it work? The probably most important thing is there is nothing to install on your VM. That was one of the things that we really started thinking about when we had this whole discussion about how can we check that. We thought about, hey, can we run that inside the VM? Should we run it outside? We probably need some other information from other resource providers in Azure. And with all the different Python versions, Python modules installed, we basically said, okay, let's forget about this VM at the moment. Let's run everything outside, connect to this VM, extract the outputs, and basically interpret them. So what we do is we run everything on Azure PowerShell modules, and the second one is Posh SSH, which is a gallery module to connect to VMs. And then, so what we do is basically we are checking some OS parameters. For example, if you're using ANF, you have to have certain networking parameters, OS parameters in place, the sysctl parameters that you can achieve the full performance. If your, for example, VM is a supported one of the things that was all important to me is we sometimes know about kernel versions that might have a problem or that we see with problems. So it can also check if we remember
Linux kernel, right? Sorry
Linux
to interrupt.
Kernel, yeah.
Linux kernel.
When we remember the times where we had this backup issue, where HANA backup said, hey, there is an inconsistency, and we had that for certain kernel versions, then this is also the script will check that. Then the different storage layouts. So for Premium, for Ultra, for ANF, we have networking checks, for example, accelerated networking is enabled, scale out, pacemaker configuration is probably one of the biggest topics at the moment. So how to build high availability and have all the parameters in place, and then also load balancer. But I think it's always better to show it. So I got 2 environments prepared for today. The first one is a RedHat pacemaker cluster, and the second one is a SUSE pacemaker cluster. And I already have to say that I'm missing the command line here. fun. So I always have to say that I prepared some errors. So, you know, we want to show how it really works. So I'm gonna go here and have here my PowerShell script, which will require a resource group, a subscription name, a VM name, an IP address or host name, a user, if I'm running a scale up or scale out HANA. In this case, I'm running UltraDisk. The second example will be Premium, which SSH port, and I'm going for high availability. I'm then entering my password for the VM. Talking and entering passwords is sometimes hard. And now it's basically starting to connect, and I'll scroll up in a minute when the check is done and explain what was basically checked.
Oh, that's pretty fast, actually.
Yeah, it's quite okay, I would say. With ANF, it's a little bit slower because I need some more resource providers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically checking if the VM is running, otherwise I couldn't connect. And then it starts to collect some stuff, including, for example, the physical host that it's running on, which VM type, if it has a PPG, if the VM type is supported. On RedHat, I'm checking for tuned, for example, if the HANA parameters are in place. And then I have some OS checks for storage. So in this case, they only apply for ANF, so nothing to do. And here I already created some errors. So the data disk, for example, should have 400 megabytes per second. The log disk would require at least 1,800 IOPS. We'll change that in a minute, and then we'll rerun it again. And I also added the pacemaker configuration here. So in this case, it's the fencing agent. We are using concurrent fencing through settings that is sometimes forgotten. And then the RedHat load balancer here has a problem because the timeout value is not correctly set. So let's fix our errors here. Go to the HANA load balancer, load balancing rules, and move the idle timeout to the required 30 minutes. The second thing we have to do is go to my HANA VM. And then we had the data disk. Data disk also, so here we can do it online, it's UltraDisk. It requires 400 megabytes per second. And then the log disk requires at least 1,800 IOPS. So we'll give it 2,000.
It's Christmas time.
It's Christmas time, correct. And let's rerun the whole thing. Mistyped. And what a surprise.
Great.
Storage performance works. And also the HA port timeout is set to 30 minutes. So I think that's really cool. The second example I have here is for SUSE. So let's also run this one here. This one is using premium storage.
Nice.
And so what are the big differences? We can see that here it's checking for subconf, subtune, if the HANA parameters are already there. And in the premium space, we are also checking for whether the data disk is striped, whether it has the right stripe size. If all the disks have the same disk characteristics, so disk type, it wouldn't make any sense to, for example, combine a P50 and a P30. So this is a certified disk environment, disk layout, including the file system XFS. Same applies for log, and for log we also check if write accelerator is enabled.
Fantastic.
And then there's a little bit more of HA checks here, because here I'm using SPD device instead of fencing agent. And you can see that message weight and watchdog settings are in a lot of cases wrong. And yeah, the HANA load balancer also works. All the checks will be stored in files here, so you can take them and, for example, send it to a colleague where it basically says, "Hey, this is what happened." Yeah, and everything is available on the Azure portal.
If I'm not mistaken, you have in one JSON description of all your checks.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
You are not mistaken.
Yeah, super.
So there is a PowerShell script with basically 5% or so of the checks implemented, but the majority of all the stuff is in the JSON definition. So things like where are my HANA log, HANA data, HANA shared. If you have different paths, then you can change it here.
Super.
And then here are all the disk layouts that are certified. So we have multiple premium disk layouts. One with the performance, what is it called? The bursting and without the bursting, and all the different VM types are specified here. And it all goes down to the cluster checks here. So for example, checking chorusing configuration or the CRM configuration here, it's up there. So CRM configure show, then I'm grabbing for the stun is enabled. And what is also cool, I think, is when we look at the OS parameters here. So if your OS parameter is wrongly configured, then we are also displaying
the link to
a message where you will find the right parameter.
Cool.
Right.
Nice.
I think that's so. I think this is really a great initial start, right? To check is my settings okay? But I guess what you said, this is version 1, and you'll continue to work and you'll continue to update and provide additional features. I guess if I can run it and if I find some issues, I can also create a pull request, and because this is on GitHub, so I can also maybe partners can contribute there and let us know their findings and help us improve this tool, so that over time we'll get more and more functionalities in there.
Yeah, and we already have ideas, especially in the clustering space and OS setting space. So we want to expand it to ACS. We want to expand it to app servers, where we see that, for example, if you have the wrong OS settings and you have an ACS failover, how the performance or the response time is basically having a longer wait times until it comes back. So we will add additional features, and in the future you might say, hey, now I'm running a HANA check, now I'm running an ACS check or an app server check, and we'll basically only apply the checks required.
So quick question, when you ran the check for RedHat and then when you ran the check for SUSE, did you need to specify the operating system, or is this also one check? No,
everything is built in, so it's checking whether it's SUSE or whether it's RedHat, and based on the config file, it also checks, for example, do certain checks apply for fencing agent or do certain checks apply only for SPD. So it detects, or the idea is to detect basically everything that is possible without any command line. And we'll also start to work on things like querying the subservices file, where we already know there are HANAs installed. Okay, so the idea is to automate as much as possible and then simply have a run button in the future where everything is automatically detected.
But I mean, I really love the idea that it is available on GitHub. So I can work with it. I can make my own modifications. I can also clone it, and well, if I don't want to share, I can still use it and adjust whatever I like. So I think that's really, really powerful.
And whenever you run it, it also checks on the GitHub repo.
Is there a new version?
If there is a new version of the JSON file or of the PowerShell script.
So one question, Philipp. I know that it's a long way to do something like that, but do you see, are we going in the direction in the future we have option to define some kind of policy in Azure? Because you are now running check, my environment is super, but this doesn't guarantee that someone changed something in the future and I'm not again running in an invalid environment. So do you think that we have a chance in the future to have some Azure policy defined where we can constantly check does our environment is by the book?
So of course we can't comment on any future products or so, but there are ideas on how we could include such a quality check on a regular basis. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So currently policy is a JSON file.
The policy at the moment is a JSON file. Yeah. So stay tuned. Microsoft plans in semesters. The next semester is already on the way, starting in January. And I think we will see some nice improvements there.
So great.
Yeah, so you saw it first. So actually, this is really new, right? I mean, I saw that
published it yesterday. So yeah,
exactly.
There is no LinkedIn post or nothing
this
like
premiere,
that out there.
So
others are waiting for Fridays.
This is blockbuster,
Yeah, it's a blockbuster. Yeah.
Others are waiting for announcements during TechEd or Ignite. Some wait for the podcast to announce stuff.
Yes.
No, fantastic. I think this is really great, and I mean this just follows a good tradition. I mean we had you with the cost optimizing on GitHub before. Before that there was
previous on latency.
Yes, exactly. The AZ latency check. So it's really fantastic. So obviously you set the bar pretty high. So the next time you're here, we'll need something additional, really special.
We need a recipe from Philipp,
Yes.
Ralph did that, so Philipp, now your turn.
So the next time you have to bring a recipe.
Austrian cooking specialty.
And he is a 5-star.
I'm already thinking about the next session. So
okay, great.
Perfect, good. No, I think that was really a great overview. Again, we'll obviously have the link to the GitHub repo in the show notes. Check it out, give it a try. Provide feedback. I think create issues if you find something. Create pull requests. Philipp and the team, they'll obviously work or continue to work on improving the tool, as he said. But I think any feedback from customers, from partners, ideas how to improve it, I think are very welcome. So just provide your feedback in the GitHub. Good. With this, I think we're done for today. Thank you very much for joining, everyone, and we'll see each other next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.